The ceremony was supposed to project unity, tradition, and royal strength. Instead, one private sentence shattered the calm behind the polished public display. As senior royals gathered beneath the weight of history, Meghan's name entered a conversation she was never meant to hear about. Minutes later, two palace aides carried the words beyond the royal circle. What they leaked was not casual criticism. It sounded like a final judgment, and everyone present understood the consequences. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles entered the private reception, carrying the burden of a monarch who knew that one careless phrase could wound his family and the crown. The Highland ceremony had brought him, Camilla, William, Catherine, and senior officials together in Scotland to display stability. The royal household, the professional team managing duties, ceremonies, correspondence, and public responsibilities, had prepared every detail. Yet Meghan's absence carried more weight than any planned speech. William stood near a chair as the conversation turned toward future royal appearances. Her departure from official duties had never ended the deeper argument over trust, public messaging, and who could represent the monarchy. Harry remained tied to every decision involving his wife, so any boundary placed around her would also strike him. Charles finally spoke. Meghan cannot represent this family at any future royal ceremony until trust has been rebuilt privately. The words landed without warning. William tightened his hand around the chair, relieved that someone had named the problem, but frightened by what the sentence could do to his brother. The prince understood that clarity might protect the institution while destroying what remained of the family. Camilla did not move. She had urged the king earlier to settle the question, according to one aide's recorded account, but she offered no support once the declaration filled the room. Her silence made Catherine lower her eyes. To some, the queen consort looked satisfied. To others, she looked alarmed by what she had helped unleash. Charles set down his glass and stared toward the closed door. The monarch knew the judgment had escaped the moment he spoke it. A second aide later described in a documented briefing how Catherine quietly asked whether Harry had been warned. No one answered. That silence revealed the dangerous truth. The decision had moved forward, without the son most likely to feel betrayed. William waited until the others began to leave, then asked to see his father alone. The request changed the air instantly. But the leaked sentence was only the surface. Beneath it stood four people carrying years of anger, guilt, loyalty, and unfinished grief. Behind every royal decision stands a human cost no official statement can hide. For Charles, the leaked words threatened his bond with a son. For William, they reopened wounds that had never healed. For Harry, they sounded like another door closing from thousands of miles away. And for Meghan, they transformed her absence into the center of the ceremony. None occupied the same room, yet all four were trapped inside the same conflict. Charles carried more than ceremonial pressure. He was trying to defend the crown, the institution representing the monarch, and the authority attached to that role, without losing Harry forever. His younger son's distance had become a sorrow and a public weakness, because every family fracture invited questions about stability, loyalty, and the monarchy's future. Meghan remained outside official royal life, yet her influence had never disappeared. She no longer performed duties for the family, but her name still shaped headlines, public opinion, and every discussion about reconciliation. Any limit placed on her return, therefore, carried a painful message. Acceptance was possible, but only after conditions were met. William remembered the private calls that ended badly, and the careful conversations that reached the outside world. Each failure had hardened him. The prince loved his brother, but affection no longer felt strong enough to protect the family from another breach. In his mind, trust had to come before ceremony, no matter how cold that order sounded. Harry received the warning through a message from an old palace contact. He read it once, then again, as disbelief turned into anger. Meghan watched him place the phone face down, and knew, before he spoke, that the palace had discussed her without her present. Catherine confronted William in a quiet corridor after the reception. She told him that even a fair boundary could become cruel when the person affected learned through a leak. He did not dismiss her. He simply said that silence had already cost them too much, and she heard the exhaustion beneath his certainty. Camilla later told Charles in a private conversation that uncertainty had controlled the family for years. She insisted her concern was not Meghan herself, but the king's habit of delaying choices until events made them for him. He listened, yet the argument offered no comfort. Charles remained alone after everyone left. He removed his glasses, pressed 2 fingers against his forehead, and admitted to a trusted secretary that Harry would hear rejection where he intended caution. That fear exposed the question: why had this conversation happened at the Highland ceremony? To understand why one sentence carried such force, the story must return to the private encounter that made trust the central issue. Long before the Highland gathering, there had been one final opportunity to prevent this rupture. It happened at a royal reception, away from cameras and public speeches, when family members briefly believed a fragile peace might still be possible. Then a private toast, a misunderstood remark, and a message sent before midnight changed everything. By morning, words intended for 6 people had traveled beyond the room. From that moment, trust was no longer assumed. It became a condition. Harry had spent months speaking to the royal household through advisors instead of family. The royal household, the team managing duties, correspondence, ceremonies, and public appearances, filtered every message until warmth became strategy and hesitation looked like hostility. Charles felt that distance growing, while his son began to believe every careful sentence concealed another warning. Charles arranged a private gathering at Birkhall, his Scottish residence, hoping direct conversation might stop the damage. Meghan, Harry, William, Catherine, and 2 trusted aides joined him under one agreement: nothing said inside the room would leave it. The king believed privacy might give the family space to speak honestly. Meghan entered believing the evening would reveal whether reconciliation was possible. Charles raised his glass during what became known in a documented palace account as the Birkhall Reconciliation Toast. "Family must be protected from pride on every side," he said. Meghan heard accusation in the words and looked toward Harry. He saw her hurt, but chose not to challenge his father before everyone. Harry sent a detailed account to a close confidant before midnight, hoping to understand whether he had misread the moment. By morning, a media commentator repeated part of the king's exact wording. Meghan denied contacting anyone and demanded that her husband believe her. He did, yet anger pulled him in 2 directions: toward the palace for blaming her, and toward the confidant who had broken his trust. Charles sat alone at breakfast holding a newspaper that carried his private sentence. He folded the page slowly and asked who had betrayed the room. The monarch had designed the gathering as a first step toward peace. Instead, it became proof that intimate words could escape before the family understood them. William later learned through an internal briefing that Meghan had not leaked the toast directly. Catherine urged him not to turn uncertainty into guilt. The prince answered that the wider pattern remained unchanged. Private exchanges around the Sussexes kept becoming public, whatever the path. William carried that memory into his father's room after the Highland reception. This time, he would not accept hope as policy. The past had created the suspicion, but it was William's confrontation with his father that turned suspicion into royal policy. The door closed, the aides remained outside, and the future of the family narrowed to 2 men facing each other in silence. William had waited through years of indirect messages, public accusations, and private disappointments. Charles had waited for anger to cool on its own. Neither strategy had worked. Now the prince demanded certainty, while the king feared certainty could destroy what little remained. Their confrontation was not about protocol alone. It was about Harry, Meghan, and the cost of another betrayal. William entered his father's private sitting room without a secretary, advisor, or equerry beside him. An equerry is a senior personal assistant who supports a royal figure during official duties, but tonight Even that familiar protection had been removed. The prince stood near the fireplace while Charles remained seated, already sensing that this would not be a conversation either man could soften. William asked whether the statement about Meghan was an emotional reaction or a formal position. Charles replied that it was a private boundary, not a public punishment. He wanted time, control, and room to repair the damage before the words hardened into policy. William refused that comfort. He told his father that uncertainty had allowed every private disagreement to return as a larger crisis. Meghan could not represent the family at major ceremonies, while no one knew whether confidential conversations would stay confidential. The future king spoke with restraint, but years of frustration pressed behind every sentence. Charles pushed his chair backwards. He accused his elder son of allowing resentment toward Harry to shape decisions that belonged to the monarchy. The king kept his voice low, yet the sharp movement revealed how deeply the charge had wounded him. William answered that love for his brother did not erase the danger of repeated breaches. William then revealed that he had already instructed senior staff to prepare a confidential review of future ceremonial invitations. He had not ordered Meghan's exclusion. He wanted safeguards, clear conditions, and a process that could not be changed by emotion or pressure. Charles admitted that Camilla had urged him to speak decisively before the Highland reception ended. He insisted the Queen Consort had not written the sentence or forced his hand. The monarch accepted full responsibility, even as the admission placed her closer to the conflict. William asked the question neither man could escape. Had Harry been warned? Charles said nothing. That silence confirmed everything. William understood that his brother would hear the decision from someone else, stripped of context and mercy. Before leaving, the prince said the palace must decide who controls ceremonial access before rival households control the story. Their argument exposed the emotional fracture, but the next battle would be fought through offices, invitation lists, and the people authorized to speak for the crown. Royal power rarely arrives with raised voices. More often, it appears as a name removed from a list, a meeting quietly postponed, or an instruction written in language so careful that its emotional force is almost invisible. While the family argued behind closed doors, a small palace office held the practical authority to turn Charles's sentence into reality. One signature could preserve a path back for Meghan. Another could close every ceremonial entrance without producing a single public decree. Senior officials gathered inside the Lord Chamberlain's office, the department responsible for major ceremonies, official participation, invitations, and coordination across royal occasions. The room carried no shouting, yet every page on the desk held consequences. Charles had issued no written command, leaving those present to decide whether his words were policy, guidance, or a private judgment spoken under pressure. The king had spoken decisively, but the monarch had left no signature behind whatsoever. The Lord Chamberlain studied the draft invitation framework and felt the danger hidden inside its careful language. He was not a political operator, but a cautious guardian of procedure, and he knew that removing Meghan without a clear review would make reconciliation look impossible. The official lifted his pen, then stopped. Turning family pain into permanent bureaucracy felt too final. Sophie entered after hearing that the leak was spreading. She asked whether anyone had considered what the decision would do to Harry as a son, not merely as a former working royal. The trusted confidant understood that ceremonial access was more than attendance. It signaled belonging, acceptance, and whether a path back still existed. A senior secretary then disclosed, through a documented internal briefing, that William's review had already set 3 conditions for Meghan's return: direct private dialogue, mutual confidentiality, and advance agreement over public communications. The prince had not demanded a permanent ban. He wanted rules strong enough to stop another private conversation from becoming a public weapon. Camilla sent no written order. Her private secretary, however, requested confirmation that the next ceremonial list would reflect the king's stated boundary. The Queen Consort's wording applied pressure without issuing a command, and everyone in the office understood how easily silence could become instruction. Sophie watched the Lord Chamberlain hold his pen above Meghan's name. She quietly urged him not to erase it. After a long pause, he wrote, "Suspended pending private reconciliation," and placed the pen beside the unsigned framework. The compromise preserved a narrow road back. Yet before the palace could explain its conditions, the leak reached Harry. The palace believed it had created a narrow road back, but across the distance, Harry saw only another gate being closed against his wife. Harry did not hear the decision from his father. He did not receive a careful explanation from William or a private message from the palace. He heard it through the same machinery that had damaged the family for years. A warning, a leaked quotation, and a headline forming before anyone could stop it. The sentence reached him stripped of context and mercy. In that instant, the proposed path toward reconciliation looked less like an invitation and more like humiliation. Harry received the full wording from a former palace contact who feared it would reach broadcasters within hours. The message offered no explanation of the three conditions, no mention of private dialogue, mutual confidentiality, or agreed public communication, and no warning that Meghan's position had been suspended rather than ended. The Duke saw only one brutal line: she could not represent the family. Meghan understood the danger immediately. She knew "cannot represent this family" would dominate every headline because it attacked more than her former royal role. To her, it questioned her dignity, her loyalty, and her place beside Harry. She watched his face tighten and realized the palace had allowed strangers to hear the judgment before either of them received an explanation. Harry called Charles directly. The king answered expecting anger, but his son's grief cut deeper. He demanded to know why aides had heard a decision that had never been spoken to him. The monarch insisted the sentence was private and the restriction conditional, not permanent. Harry replied that any condition delivered through a leak felt like punishment, then stepped away from the phone before his voice broke. Meghan asked whether William had designed the restriction. Harry could not answer. His silence revealed the suspicion already forming, and that suspicion threatened to turn institutional anger into a fresh battle between brothers. Catherine received word of the call through a palace aide. She closed the folder before her and told William they had only hours to prevent another public war. The prince said nothing, but he knew Harry would hear control where he had intended protection. Charles remained seated after the line disconnected. He held the phone against his ear for several seconds, until Camilla entered and saw the defeat in his expression. The king lowered his hand and whispered, he heard the sentence before he heard his father. She understood that certainty had widened the distance. Harry began drafting a public response filled with accusation, pain, and years of buried resentment. Meghan stopped him before he could send it and asked for one moment. Everything was moving toward another public explosion, until Meghan asked Harry to close the door, put down his statement, and listen. For years, the conflict had been shaped by statements issued too quickly and wounds defended too publicly. This time, Meghan stopped the cycle. With no advisors in the room and no palace officials waiting outside, she asked Harry not to answer anger with anger. The request stunned him. She had every reason to defend herself, yet she understood that another immediate response would make the leaked words permanent. What followed was not surrender. It was the first deliberate act of emotional control. Meghan switched off her phone and asked Harry to do the same. No communications advisors joined them, and no official language softened what they needed to say. The royal household, the team that manages duties, messages, ceremonies, and public responses, could not shape this moment. For once, husband and wife faced the wound itself, rather than planning how the world should see it. Harry held a prepared statement, accusing the palace of humiliating Meghan. He wanted to defend her before headlines fixed the story in the public mind. She understood that instinct, but warned him that another attack would confirm the family's deepest fear, that every private conflict surrounding them would eventually become public. Meghan admitted the leaked sentence had cut deeply because it reduced years of pain to one question: whether she could be trusted. She told Harry that a fierce defense might protect her pride for a day while destroying what remained between him and Charles. Her voice stayed calm, yet the honesty carried more force than anger. Harry placed the statement on the table and walked away from it. He confessed that silence felt like betrayal, as though refusing to fight meant abandoning his wife. Meghan answered that restraint was not weakness when it served a larger truth. She needed him beside her, not trapped in another battle with his father. Meghan then proposed a private recorded call with Charles. The recording would never be released. Both households would keep it only so no one could later dispute the words spoken or the promises made. She also accepted that trust should be rebuilt before any ceremonial return, provided palace officials followed the same rule of confidentiality. Harry returned to the table and lifted his phone. His thumb hovered above the send button until Meghan placed her hand over his and asked him to wait. He deleted the statement, then messaged Charles requesting a conversation with his wife present and no aides involved. Charles accepted. Yet before that call could begin, the original leak reached broadcasters and newspaper editors across the country. Their private restraint created the first possibility of peace, but outside that room, the leaked sentence had already become a national spectacle. By morning, a private royal sentence had become public property. Broadcasters repeated it, commentators dissected it, and crowds argued over whether it represented responsibility or rejection. Yet one image came to define the entire crisis. A newspaper held against the gates of Buckingham Palace. Its headline printed above photographs of Meghan and Charles facing in opposite directions. The family's pain had become a national argument. But behind the noise, a quieter development was already changing the meaning of the story. Two palace aides had carried the words to a royal correspondent, and within hours the quotation entered rolling television coverage. A royal correspondent is a journalist who reports closely on the monarchy, its members, and official activities. The palace refused to comment, leaving silence where explanation should have been. That silence mattered, because the public heard punishment without hearing the conditions attached to it. Britain divided quickly. Some believed the crown had every right to demand confidentiality before restoring Meghan to ceremonial life. Others heard something colder, a family publicly rejecting one of its own. The argument became larger than attendance at royal events. It became a test of whether duty could survive without compassion. Catherine watched the coverage beside William and felt the sentence changing with every repetition. She told him it sounded harsher on television than it had inside the reception room. The prince accepted that the context had vanished, but he still believed the boundary was necessary. She understood his reasoning, yet feared certainty had arrived without mercy. Charles heard a broadcaster describe the decision as a father closing the royal door on his daughter-in-law. The king asked for the television to be turned off. He insisted the words did not reflect his intention, but the monarch could no longer control how the country understood them. Outside Buckingham Palace, a woman raised the front page of the fictional London Chronicle above the crowd. "Trust before the crown. King's private words on Meghan exposed," it declared. One group applauded the demand for accountability. Another called for direct reconciliation before the family lost another chance. Then the mood shifted. A respected broadcaster announced that Harry had not released the angry statement many expected. His silence became the morning's greatest surprise. Soon after, the palace confirmed through a written notice that a private family conversation had been arranged, though it named no participants. Charles entered the call with Harry and Meghan while the coverage continued outside. The world had delivered its judgment loudly, but the verdict that mattered would come through one private conversation and one promise made without witnesses. There was no grand apology before cameras, no triumphant return, and no dramatic defeat. The true resolution came in a private conversation where each person surrendered something. Charles surrendered royal silence and admitted his failure to warn his son. Harry surrendered the public response that might have deepened the fracture. Meghan surrendered the demand for instant acceptance. What emerged was not perfect peace, but something more credible, A clear boundary joined to a genuine path forward. Charles joined Harry and Meghan on a recorded call with no aides present. The recording would remain confidential and served only to prevent arguments over what had been said. Memory had become another battlefield, and every disputed sentence widened the distance between them. Charles explained that his Highland statement was a temporary condition, not a permanent ban. Meghan's ceremonial participation would remain suspended until trust returned through communication. The king kept the boundary, but he admitted that allowing Harry to discover it through a leak had caused avoidable pain. Meghan answered calmly. She could accept fair conditions, but not the assumption that every disclosure began with her. She asked that palace staff face the same confidentiality rules demanded of the Sussex household. Harry supported her, yet he did not turn the call into another attack on his father. The three approved a reconciliation framework, monthly communication, no unauthorized public briefings, and a private review after 6 months. No ceremonial role would return before that review. The agreement offered no instant victory, but it replaced confusion with a path both sides could measure. The consequences followed quickly. The two aides who spread the reception conversation were removed from sensitive duties. The palace issued no humiliating explanation, yet an internal directive confirmed that leaking family discussions violated royal service. Harry ended the call and told Meghan this was not the welcome they once wanted. She replied that it was at least an honest beginning. Across the distance, Charles wrote the 6-month review date in his notebook and circled it once. He later told Camilla that the door remained open, but it would never again remain undefined. The Highland leak did not restore Meghan to royal life or erase the hurt. It forced Charles to accept accountability, allowed Harry to protect his marriage without starting another public war, and gave Meghan a measured route toward trust. The ceremony began as a display of tradition, but its true legacy was personal. Reconciliation could not be commanded, leaked, or performed. It had to be rebuilt privately, one promise at a time. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.